Let's take a look at your market news now. Asia markets rose today as fears about a China-US trade war were tempered by hopes that the two sides would come to a more civil agreement. There are hopes that Trump's headline-grabbing tariffs are part of a plan to take a harsh line as a bargaining tactic towards a deal with China. And on Sunday, Trump tweeted that he saw an end to the dispute, saying China will take down its trade barriers because it's the right thing to do. Tokyo stocks closed in positive territory. The Nikkei share average up 0.5%. Hong Kong shares led the charge with the Hang Seng index up 1.3%. Chinese stocks also traded in the black, but not to the same degree. The Shanghai Composite Index rose 0.2%. Wall Street stocks plunged more than 2% on Friday. The Dow falling as much as 500 points. The markets wobbled as US President Donald Trump's latest tariff threat on Chinese imports fueled increasing concerns around a trade war between the two economic powers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 2.34%. The S&P 500 lost 2.2%, and the Nasdaq Composite Index dropped 2.3%. Let's take a look at your main financial indicators. Bright Kumalo from Investec joins me in studio. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News, Bright. It seems like the US markets are increasingly volatile. We're seeing these record drops more often. What's happening?
Yes, you mentioned at the beginning of the segment that it's basically those trade wars between China and the US. And what's interesting is that now the US wants to impose a further 100 billion in these trade tariffs, which means basically they're going to have more tariffs that actually export to China, which is insane because currently they export about 146 billion US dollars. So the tweet that Trump, came out with recently, I see that the market is, driven by tweets, just like the first half of last year. It's sort of, settling because now I can see that the markets are affecting basically what he says affects the markets, and the market is basically a yardstick on how he measures himself on how great he's doing for America. So because of that, I think he's going to back down.
When we've been looking at the markets in the last week or two, this trade war, this looming trade war always comes up. But in terms of practical terms that I can understand on a very basic level, how does it affect our markets? How does it affect us in South Africa? And how does this back and forth affect people on a day-to-day basis?
So basically, we have, globally trade controls to make it easier to move goods from one country to the next without actually incurring a lot of costs, which meant, most importantly, like China has been able to export quite a lot to many different countries, including the US, and because they have the capacity to produce these products very cheaply. So by imposing tariffs on their products, it means that, they want to produce those items themselves in their own country. But for people that are consuming those products, it means that they're going to pay more for the same products because now, there's an additional stamp on the item that you're buying. A good example here in South Africa will be the textiles industry. If you try to buy techies on Amazon or any other offshore sort of based entity and to try bring them in South Africa, you get slapped with a 50% tariff on top of that because we are protecting our own textile and manufacturing industry here in South Africa, which if you ask me, I don't see it because we don't produce anything in South Africa. So this is just like a very traditional sort of tariff that we once had, which is actually making most of the garments that we buy very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Asian markets on Monday not following these US declines, they seem like they're doing well, they're closing up.
Remember, Asia is usually ahead of us. Maybe there's good news that's going to come out in China. I don't know. I can't say for certain. But looking at the companies that we follow very closely down there, the likes of Tencent, Baidu, and all the companies that are listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, they seem to be doing very well. They closed up about 1.5% or higher. Which is trickling down to our market as we see it. The industrials index in South Africa now is up about 2/3%. That's mostly Naspers as well, so I must say.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at company news here. We'll start with Barclays Africa. They announced earlier on that they're changing their group structure and management, and we're seeing their share price drop so slightly when that announcement came out.
Yes, so what Absa is doing is very interesting because they had basically a CEO, Maria Ramos, and a deputy CEO who is now taking a sort of a sabbatical, 2-month sabbatical, which makes no sense while, you know, this management reshuffle is happening and you want to take a break for 2 months. Or maybe it's that old trick where, you know, you take a 2-month sabbatical, you come back, your office is no longer there. Yeah, what's interesting there is that there are 4 different divisions in the Absa company, or the Absa group, what they call themselves now, and one of those heads of that got fired, and they're supplementing with a guy who comes from group risk, and that guy is going to be, and all the other 3 heads basically are going to be reporting directly to Maria Ramos instead of the deputy.
Okay. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg in the United States, he's going to be facing Congress about this Facebook Analytica thing where the information of about 87 million users, private information, has been shared or used badly.
Correct. So the most recent on that is the YouTube issue, which is a whole different issue, but it touches on the same sort of user privacy and what they do with your information. We're all waiting to see what Mark Zuckerberg is going to say to Congress, whether he's going to, you know, do the right thing, and actually be as transparent as possible, because I think what investors want to know going forward, what does it mean in terms of advertisers liking Facebook as a platform to advertise, to put their content there, and for users to know that actually when I look at this content or when I use this product, which is Facebook, the social media, no one is actually tapping into my privacy without me asking, you know. A good example is, you know, someone said around 2010, they basically were looking for a carpenter or something, and they found one online. They used the carpenter, never spoke to the guy again, and you find that last year Facebook is starting to recommend this person as a person you might know. What they've done there is that they've tapped into your actual phone, your call directory, and they find that number and they say, okay, you've spoken to this person before, you might know this person, but you've never given them access to actually your cell phone directory, which is very weird, and it compromises a lot of personal security. And on the YouTube side of things, the complaint there is that YouTube is using people that are below the age of 13. They're taking their information, they're collecting them without, you know, sort of them saying yes. What's happening here is that when you subscribe to YouTube, on the terms and conditions, it says YouTube is only allowed to be used by people who are age 13 and above. And obviously, sometimes you find kids that are a bit smarter, they know how their way around the computer, and they're not using a YouTube for kids, there is an app for kids specifically, which, you know, gives you access to nursery rhymes, you know, all of these Disney-like toys, unboxing, all of that, those YouTube channels, which have millions and millions of views, but I'm not quite sure about the content. The loophole here is that once you've ticked that you're above 13, then YouTube can, you know, target market better to you based on what you watch basically on YouTube. So, and you know what happens when kids are not under any supervision.
Yes, I do, unfortunately. But very briefly, this kind of bad news coming about Facebook and YouTube, is it going to drag the tech stocks even down, and then you see the US market also being dragged further like it was last week with those tech stocks?
Look, this is also new to us because it hasn't happened before at the scale at which it's happening at, and we haven't seen many activists before as we are seeing today. So I can't really say with certainty what's going to be the repercussions in the interim. But long term, I think the companies will do the right thing, and, you know, they'll put the correct controls to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future.
Brad Kumalo from Investec, thanks so much for your time on SABC News. It's time for a short break. I'll have more business news for you when we return. Do stay with us.